FAU, we talked about their season. We've talked about them a lot over the past few months and their quarterback situation, 5-4. Willie Taggart in his first year. The offense definitely had some issues. Wasn't necessarily stagnant per se, but believe it or not, they're one of the few teams that averaged fewer points than FIU. We've talked about, their offensive struggles, or I should say quarterback struggles for FIU. They didn't have offensive struggles. Devontae Price put the rock in the end zone a lot via the ground. But
Yeah.
FAU averaged just a shade over 19 points a game. Their quarterback situation last year was mainly Nick Tronti, a little bit of Javion Posey, a little bit of Willie Taggart Jr. in some gadget package situations. Steve, I want to let you talk about kind of what you've assessed so far, and then I'll kind of jump in and on the back end and maybe provide a little context as well.
Yeah, so I think, man, just like we've talked about through the whole season, and right now, this is arguably probably one of the most wide open quarterback battles in Conference USA. Would you say it's probably accurate, Eric, as far as like?
Listen, you could say the whole league is pretty wide open as far as QB battles, but absolutely. Go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
I think in the fact that it's literally like a 3 to 4 man race. It's not just like a 2-man race, even though maybe Nick Tronti and Willie Taggart have gotten some headlines so far, Willie Taggart Jr. But I really think it's a 4-man race compared to some of the other schools we'll talk about. It's more of a 2-man race.
Here's what I'll say. For those who listened to our last episode, we kind of talked about the fact that you have certain races where even though you have 4 guys, really the coach kind of has an idea like, all right, this guy more than likely, if he performs well in the spring and the fall, is going to be my starter, and this is kind of probably going to be my backup. At FAU, legitimately, you can make the case, not to say that I've talked to Willie Taggart or gotten in his head, but you can make the case that it's wide open between all 4 guys. That it's legit split 25% across the line.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So kind of, yeah, back to the point. It's just like, when you look at it, you're like, okay, there's 3 or 4 guys in the competition. So they all got to get equal-ish reps, right? At some point, you have
Sure.
You practice in the spring and then you have fall. So it's 1, how do you go about distributing those reps? And then 2, how do you go about making those tough calls of who's going to eventually get the one, the reps of the ones. And so I thought, so Willie Taggart had a quote, and you probably know this press more than I do, just being in the media field. The University Press, are they in?
University Press is one of the student-run outlets there at Florida Atlantic.
Okay, so by someone named Trey Avent, and he was quoting Willie Taggart, said Nick threw a couple of good balls in there, a couple of touchdowns. Willie ran for a touchdown. He did a couple of good things. So it seems like those 2 guys are at least making some progress. We haven't heard much about Posey or Michael Johnson, but I think they're all similar quarterbacks and they're all athletic, right? You need to be athletic in that offense that they're going to run, a lot of RPO schemes. Tronti, of course, had the majority of playing time last year, but what sticks out to me is the completion percentage was under 53. And for you to be an effective offense and actually get the run game going and get your quarterback running, you need to be completing balls at a higher percentage. You want to be at least that 60-ish range. I know Javion Posey had that one awesome game. I think it was against FIU, right, where he just ran all over the place.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, but besides that, the quarterback position as a whole just didn't contribute as much as you'd want to. So I think another year.
Hey, Steve, can I stop for one quick second?
Please.
Sorry, typically I don't like to stop you when in the middle of your explanation, but I know we've talked a lot about completion percentages, and I know we're going to talk about it with UAB as well. Can you just explain for those who maybe first-time listeners and new listeners why that's so important? Because I know we assume that most people come with a certain level of intricacy knowledge, but explain why that's so important as far as running your offense.
So I think they're drive killers. If you have a low completion percentage, you're basically living not on a prayer, but you're living on making a big play to establishing a drive and completing the drive or not. And so if you're only completing just a nick over half your passes, then you're going to have a lot of 3 and outs, maybe 1 first down, then punt. And then you might have a big play for your score. And you don't want to rely on big plays for your score. You want consistent drives. So that's the biggest thing why a low completion percentage is kind of leading to a faulty offense, if you will, offense with a bunch of holes. But FIU has the talent. FAU has athletic ability at the quarterback position. It's now getting those guys to a place to complete more passes. And I think this year being much different than last year with COVID, I think this spring ball is going to be huge for every school, but especially FAU as they're looking for that quarterback.
Do you kind of have a favorite? I know we've seen Nick Tronti play a little bit or a fair amount, considering last year he was the primary starter. We've seen Javion Posey, definitely a dynamic athlete. You probably want to see him bulk up a little bit. He's definitely someone who has a slight build. Yeah. Of course, Michael Johnson Jr., the son of offensive coordinator Mike Johnson. Michael Johnson Jr. was at Penn State, former 4-star recruit at Penn State. Then also Willie Taggart Jr., of course, the son of Willie Taggart, the head coach. Do you kind of have, from just what you've seen, and of course we haven't seen much of Willie Taggart Jr. at quarterback. We've seen him kind of in gadget situations. What's kind of your read per se, and maybe if you were ranking him or just your favorites or your thoughts on the guy specifically?
That's such a good question. Because we saw mostly Nick Tronti last year, but for whatever reason, I just can't get the idea out of my head that, Michael Johnson, I think the junior, Michael Johnson.
Michael Johnson Jr., yes.
Okay. He was a 4-star. He was a big-time recruit, went to Penn State. So from a tool standpoint, I haven't seen him play in college, but you just have to imagine, he looks like a 4-star. And according to 24/7 Sports, I was reading this earlier, they were even projecting him to be a potential wide receiver at the next level.
Right.
So that tells you that his athleticism right there is huge. So if I had to rank them, man, that's such a good question. But for whatever
reason,
it's
early, brother. It's spring.
Yeah.
We can always revisit this in fall.
For whatever reason, man, I might put Michael Johnson there just because I haven't seen him play. And so usually it's counterintuitive, but I've seen Tronti play. I feel like I got a good grasp on him. I've seen Posey play, great runner. I haven't seen much Taggart, and I haven't seen any of Michael Johnson. So I might put Johnson first. Then that's just speculation. But that's just for the pure mindset of projecting his talent to eventually take over that position. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. This is the big thing. I'll just kind of give you my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Willie Taggart, the most success that Willie Taggart has had as a collegiate head coach was at USF. And we've talked about this on this podcast, other podcasts. The Gulf Coast offense, right? That is his version of the West Coast offense. For those who may not know, Willie Taggart's coaching tree stems back to Stanford. His time as a collegiate player was spent under Jack Harbaugh. That led him to introduction to coach under Jim Harbaugh, of course, the son of Jack Harbaugh at Stanford. He played for Jack Harbaugh at Western Kentucky. Hopefully, I'm giving you guys an educational lesson there on kind of the Willie Taggart coaching tree and kind of where his offensive principles come from, right? So his version of the West Coast offense, having spent time at Stanford, and that was kind of some of the principles that Jim Harbaugh implemented there with the Cardinal. It's an offense that has West Coast offense principles, but it allows for an athletic quarterback to kind of get in there and do some things as far as using his legs. A lot of that success he had at South Florida is with Quentin Flowers. That's not to say that you can only be an athletic, quote-unquote, dual-threat quarterback to run that offense efficiently. However, the bulk of his success was there with a Quentin Flowers type. Spring that forward to Florida Atlantic, I think personally, Willie Taggart's offense is run best when he has someone who is not someone who the defense has to respect and be like, oh, okay, they may run the football. And Nick Tronti, better athlete that people give him credit for, but he's not necessarily a dynamic dual threat that you might see necessarily with Javian Posey. Now, with Posey, the big thing with him was the ability to throw the football. For Quentin Flowers, even though he didn't necessarily carve out a career in the NFL as a quarterback, I believe he spent time with Cincinnati as a running back, spent some time in some other leagues, XFL and otherwise as a quarterback. Quentin Flowers was an above-average thrower of the football. If you look at his time at USF, threw for over 2,500 yards, I believe 3 times, if my memory serves me correct, right? So to spring that, to kind of their quarterback situation, I think you have to find that right blend. I know you're almost saying in a perfect world, of course you want someone who can run and throw efficiently, right? It's not necessarily saying that they have to be, Justin Fields, right? It's not saying they have to be a 5-star at in both capabilities. It's saying that you probably want someone who's an above average runner that the defense has to do more than just respect, but also when it's 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, it can get the ball to the playmakers, when those opportunities are there. So if that is Michael Johnson, I would say you probably want to project him a little bit higher. Let's just see what Javian Posey. We know the type of athlete is a track athlete. I saw what he did against FIU. But his passing skills need to develop a little bit more. And then, of course, Willie Taggart Jr. is the wild card. So you kind of know what you have in Nick Tronti, my opinion. I would put a lot of my emphasis, if I were in Willie Taggart's shoes, into kind of exploring what you have with the other guys.
Agreed. I got nothing to add. You wrapped it up good. Yep.
Sure. So let's go and transition to UAB. That is a situation that for the past few years has been very much a boom or bust style offense, right? When I say boom or bust, it's either been touchdown or interception. First down, 3 and out. A thing that has helped that offense tremendously, in my opinion, I'm sure Steve, you would agree, is a dynamic running game, one that was really boosted and bolstered by Spencer Brown. Spencer Brown, one of the most dynamic running backs in Conference USA, maybe all of G5 football, someone who you think probably has a pro career in his future as he is moving on, graduated from UAB. They return a good running back in Dwayne McBride, who had enough carries, had under 100 carries last year, would have led not UAB. He already led UAB. Would have led Conference USA in rushing yards per attempt. Steve, he's someone who had, if my memory serves me correct, something like 50 or 60 carries for 480 something yards. So would have averaged almost 8 or 9 yards a pop. Had he, had enough carries to qualify for the rushing lead there, the yards per attempt. So the run game will still be there. However, you still want to see more from the passing game, and over the past few years, the completion percentages have been down. TD to INT ratio has been pretty abysmal. So, Steve, I'll let you take it away and talk about the guys that they will be in play for Bill Clark and Bryant Vincent.
So I think right now, you probably have a two-man race in Bryson Lucerio and Tyler Johnson the third. And, of course, other people could emerge. But those are the guys that played the bulk last year. And then, of course, Tyler Johnson the third playing the majority of the games the year before. And excuse me. And like Eric said, the completion percentage, very similar to FAU, the completion percentage has been what's kind of held that UAB offense back, if you will. And they've had a great running game that could kind of like mask that inefficiency as a passing team. But I think for them to take that next step offensively, they really need to find ways and scheme up plays and have just specific play designs for high completion percentage throws. And another thing you want to talk about here is the interception rate as well. That's something Tyler Johnson III did much better this year. And splitting time with Lucerio, he had 7 touchdowns, only 1 interception, and then Bryson had 7 touchdowns, 8 interceptions last year. So Bryson definitely had the majority of the interceptions, and TJ3 actually I thought played better at times last year, but it's just that inconsistency factor. The inconsistency on both of them. Both have the ability to push the ball downfield, and Lucerio has a very good arm. We've seen that, but the arm strength doesn't necessarily matter if you can't make those 3rd and 5, those 36s, those quick slants. So I think offensively they need to come up with a design, a scheme that's going to help complete those short passes. And regardless who wins that quarterback competition, if you can get that completion percentage over 60-ish for UAB, would be huge in my opinion.
Steve, I want to ask you this. It always felt to me personally that whether it's been I'm about to say Bryant Vincent, Bryson Lucero, TJ3, or even Dylan Hopkins, prior years, they all kind of look the same.
Yeah.
Is that fair? The fair assessment as quarterbacks?
I think TJ3 is probably a bit more athletic, and Lucero probably has a stronger arm, but in general, I agree. Yes.
So what does that say to you, right? Because when you look at this offense, it's not necessarily that one guy is – I don't want to say that one guy is distinctly better or worse than the other. I think all 3 quarterbacks, in my opinion, and for the full disclosure, a lot of my Saturdays, I'm already in a press box. I think I get to watch UAB on the back end. I don't get a chance to watch them live. But it feels to me almost as if all 3 quarterbacks are a product of the offense they're in, as opposed to necessarily a product of their talent. You think that's a fair assessment?
I would agree. 100%, yes.
Okay, so want to dive into offensive coordinator Bryant Vincent's offense here. Bryant Vincent has been at the helm. I believe this is his 4th season. Memory serves me correct. He was there. He took over the 2018 season. I believe the 2017 season, if memory serves me correct, was Les Koning, who went to Southern Miss as the running backs coach. Prior to his time at UAB, he was offensive coordinator for Joey Jones at South Alabama for 3 seasons. What does it say to you? And once again, I'm not the person to give you a deep dive into Bryant Vincent's offense. I'm just taking a look at some of the numbers here and asking questions, from a layman's perspective. The highest completion percentage in the 6 years, the past 6 years that Bryant Vincent has been offensive coordinator, has been just a shade above 56%. Steve, where would you like to see your offense? If you're talking about, quarterbacks, where do you want to see that completion percentage kind of range between for an ideal offense?
You at least want to be above that 60-ish. That's usually like the ideal mark, is that 60-ish mark, and if it's below, that's okay, as long as the touchdown to interception ratio is, far and in between, that 4-to-1 plus type deal. That's a little balanced. But typically, you want that 60-ish plus range for sure.
So I'm putting you on the spot here, right? This is the $1 million question. And I think we've kind of talked around a little bit as far as the quarterbacks, maybe their skill set within the offense. From what I've seen of UAB, again, like I said, I tend to spend my times in press boxes. I'm typically occupied at FIU. Damn it, it's $1 in the jar when I mix with FAU and FIU. But Steve, from what I see, it's a very much a boom or bust offense, right? You see a lot of, and when I mean by boom or bust, I want to explain this to the listeners. If you look at the receivers they've had, Austin Watkins, Myron Mitchell, Kendall Parham, those are guys who usually are considered deep threats because their yards per catch, usually above 15, 16, 17 yards per catch. And you look at the yards per attempt with their quarterbacks, they're throwing the ball downfield. It's not like they're dinking and dunking and, 2 and 3 yard passes. Some of those interceptions do appear to be, in my opinion, it's very much like, hey, we got, they're not necessarily running all go routes, but they're asking their quarterbacks to throw the ball downfield a fair amount. And I'm just curious from your POV, do you think necessarily that their quarterbacks aren't equipped and that's not using to the best of their abilities in terms of their skill set? Or it's just a matter of, hey, still kind of searching for that right guy and finding that right mix between we're going to push the ball downfield and, maybe finding some efficiency? Because again, all this discussion we're having about UAB, they've won the conference 2 out of 4 years. It's not that they're losing games by any stretch of the imagination. This is not a situation like you can look at other programs and say, hey, the offense, like a Rice, for example, where Rice is maybe just that one quarterback away from, all right, 3, 4, 5 wins to 6, 7, 8 wins. UAB is still successful, but it's just finding that consistency at quarterback that could probably take them to, being among the upper echelon of group of 5 teams. So I've cushioned it enough. I'll let you have at it there.
Yeah. So to answer your question, and like Eric, it's not like we watch, UAB on a regular basis, but we try to get eyes on the film. I think it's probably a combination of too many deep shots being taken and just not kind of working to your quarterback's skill set, if you will, and allowing him to get in a rhythm. Just like, we've talked before in the podcast, if a quarterback's in a rhythm and he's kind of in a groove, so to speak, then he's going to be more confident, push the ball downfield. And if he starts off the game 0 for 3, then as a quarterback mentally, you're always thinking, man, okay, I haven't had a completion yet. Now I'm throwing this deep ball, I'm 0 for 4, as opposed to a quick screen, quick slant, quick swing out to the running back, whatever it may be, just to get his confidence going a little bit and to kind of get that feel. So that's something to think about offensively. And then, like you said, they've been so successful in conference, even with the quarterbacks kind of that boom or bust kind of feel. But I think for them to take the next step and maybe be what, not comparing them to like a UCF or anything, but for them to go undefeated and have that like UCF feel that they've had, or that Cincy feel, and be like, okay, this is the Cinderella of the group of 5 this year, if you will. I think offensively they do need to take that next step. And a bit more firepower from the throwing game will potentially help them with that next step to be that, for lack of better terms, that Cinderella group of 5 program that we've seen from Cincy and UCF and a few other schools the past few years, even Liberty to an extent, even though they're not in the group of 5.
No, Steve, I think that's a good analogy. I think you're fair in saying taking that next step towards, the UCFs, the Boise States of the world, who are kind of not just the head of their conference, but the top tier in group of 5 football. Look at Bill Clark's record. So 2014, and remember, Bill Clark stayed with the program through the shutdown when he had opportunities to leave, and he should be commended for that. Not very many coaches are going to say, hey, we're shutting this program down, I'm going to stay, 3 years until things get back together. But first year 6-6, second year 8-5, they lost in the Bahamas Bowl. The third year 11-3, they win the conference. 2019, win the West. So they've won the West 3 straight years, losing the New Orleans Bowl 9-5. And then last year, and of course the truncated season, 6-3, win the West, win the conference. So what Steve's saying, to his point, you got a little bit better quarterback play. Maybe those 11-3, 9-5s. Maybe that 11-3 is a 12-1 or a 13-1. Quick math, it could be a 13-1. Maybe that 9-5. That's another 10-win year right there, and that brings you out of the discussion of, hey, we're the beasts of CUSA into that perennial group of 5 conversation. So I think that's a fair expectation on your part. As we transition to our final team we're going to talk about, that's Memphis. Want to get your thoughts on that quarterback race there. Peter Parrish, Grant Gunnell, definitely guys with a little bit of different skill sets in Memphis. Of course, they've been quarterbacked by the great Brady White, who seems to have been in college football for many of years, but his tenure has now come to an end. Brady White will probably be joining us, in his 30s soon enough. Steve, what do you got with Memphis?
Yeah, so I think they just got their spring practice underway just a few days ago. I think UAB started recently and Memphis just started recently. And I have a quote from the Memphis Commercial Appeal, which I guess is a newspaper.
That's the newspaper of record in Memphis, correct?
And Evan Barnes was the one who wrote this article, but it gives us a glimpse of Grant Gunnell and kind of what the competition is going to have a feel. And this was written a little while ago before spring started, but still relevant. And so this is Coach Silverfield talking about Grant Gunnell. He's got all those intangibles you talk about, like with Brady White. He's smart. He's a big kid. He's almost like Paxton Lynch type size and hardworking. That was a quote about Grant Gunnell, the transfer from Arizona. And then he says, Silverfield goes on to say, we have what we feel at least 4 guys currently in the roster that are capable of being a starting quarterback here. I think competition brings the best out in anybody. Grant Gunnell will be competing. Peter Parrish, who will be a sophomore, who was a transfer from LSU previously, and then incoming recruit and freshman Keelan Brown. In my opinion, this is one of those things where a coach is saying, hey, we got 4 guys competing, but it's probably a 2-man race between Peter Parrish and Grant Gunnell. 2 different quarterbacks who we've talked about before in the podcast. Gunnell is going to be more of a true pocket presence guy who wants to sit in the pocket and just rip it, throw it all over the field. Peter Parrish is more that dual threat guy who can throw it, but he wants to use his legs to help open up the throwing game, and has a different set of tools and set of skills that the defense has to prepare for. So I think it's 2 different offenses essentially. 2 different offenses will be ran depending who will win that starting quarterback position. But like we've seen before, Memphis has a history of good quarterbacks from Riley Ferguson, Brady White, Paxton Lynch. And so I would expect nothing less. I would expect a good quarterback to come in and continue the reigns that Memphis has and continue to be one of the top AAC teams.
Steve, real quick, before we finish up, I want to ask you this about that quarterback situation. We've talked about, and of course I know you pay attention to the American pretty closely, we've talked about the various quarterback situations across that conference. Do you feel, just as a whole, if Memphis kind of gets that situation right and the quarterback play is, let's just say, above average, right? Do you think they are in that mix with UCF and, some of the other teams, Tulane's and Houston's of the world, who are looking to contend in the American?
Yeah, I think for sure, based on the past few years and the athletes they have around the quarterback, I would say definitely that they should be in contention with at least above average quarterback play.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Memphis, the thing that I've always found most intriguing about that conference is, and you know what? Before we close, I want to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah,
it seems if some of the programs have tried to out UCF in terms of scoring, and I think Memphis was pretty equipped to do that, right? Brady White. Darrell Henderson, who's with the LA Rams. Come on, who's the other running back? My man with the Cowboys.
Tony Pollard. No.
Pollard.
Okay,
Pollard. Yeah, there we go. Right. It's like they've had so many backs come through there, right? And even now, just the litany of talent they've had there. Antonio Gibson. I mean, just a ton of talent that's been there at Memphis, right? They've almost taken the approach, right, that they're going to kind of out UCF, just not quite enough, firepower to do so. And then you look at a team like Tulsa. Tulsa said, we're going to take the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. Yes, we do have, some talent at quarterback, but Zaven Collins, a hell of a defensive player, right? I mean, that guy's a stud. And when they beat UCF, that's because Dylan Gabriel couldn't get the ball off.
Yeah.
What's kind of your thoughts on that, right? Do you feel in that conference, Tulane, Michael Pratt, solid quarterback, but they have had defense as well, Patrick Johnson and guys like that. What's kind of your thoughts per se? I know this is a quarterback podcast, so
it's interesting, and I can kind of relate to the quarterback position, but I think even Cincinnati is probably your perfect blend.
Cincinnati, there you go, right?
Solid, badass defense, right? But also their offense is explosive like that. That's like what UCF fans would want in their defense, right? To mix a good defense with the explosive offense, which Cincy had last year. So I think that's a good example. I think Memphis, go back to them, I don't think they had that defense that Tulsa had or that Tulane has had. So I think they played to their strengths, and their strengths happen to be the same strengths that UCF has had. And so it's like, okay, let's just see what we got. I think, didn't they beat UCF this past year in 2020?
Who are you referring to?
Memphis, right? Memphis beat UCF this past year.
I don't believe so. I have to go back and double check it. Right? I don't think they did, but we.
I'm gonna have to double check that. But
we're gonna give you a peek behind the curtain. All right, fill time, Steve, fill time.
But the moral behind the story remains the same. That the reason why Memphis has gone more offense to beat UCF or to compete with UCF is because that's the type of players that they've had compared to Tulsa, more defense. Cincinnati had a blend. Tulane, more defense with a quarterback that is developing. So I think Memphis has had to play to their strengths to beat or play up to UCF's competition.
Steve, that may have been the UCF alum in me that was suppressing that. Not only was that a game I should remember, I mean, that was a hell of a game. It was the 50-49 game.
That was that, and I think that's the game Dylan Gabriel and Brady White set all types of records. That I remember writing an article for Underdog Dynasty about that game, the quarterback play, and all these records that happened.
601 yards from Dylan Gabriel, 486 for Brady White. So yeah, that's a game that I very much should remember, but it's probably the UCF alum in me that's trying to suppress that. And I think we had a situation there at the end with an extra point, or was it a field goal, right?
2 points.
Because remember the kicker took some heat. What was that?
Yes.
Right?
And the backup quarterback for UCF was taking heat on Twitter.
Right.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Okay.
Listen, Steve's the father, so he has an excuse. I don't have an excuse. I should remember that. I've been, you follow me for CUSA coverage, all right? Go to Joe Broback, at Joe Broback on Twitter for the American.
His fault. We'll blame that on him. He should have had us prepared for this.
Absolutely. But with that being said, I want to thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the QB Spotlight Podcast. Mention it one quick time, do a quick rundown. You can find us on Twitter at QB Spotlight. You can find Steve on Twitter at Stephen Hamner, StevenHamner. You can find me on Twitter at EricCHenry_. And please leave reviews and follow us on YouTube. Steve's got the YouTube channels putting out great content there. Just go and punch up QB Spotlight, and you get a more visual medium of some of the things that he's talking about in terms of quarterback play. Thank you for listening. Happy football watching, everybody. Spring football is here. It's back. Enjoy it, because then we'll be heading to the dark months of the summer, in which we'll just be waiting for the fall. So stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next week.